everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. In this video, I got an email from Christian Zybarth, and this shared a story about someone who claimed to have witnessed a resurrection. You could put this in the category of, church folklore, but this really could have happened. And so I just wanted to share this, but also I wanted to talk about more than just that. Talking about resurrection, I wanted to look into a few different things that relate to this story, such as cremation, the church's stance on cremation, dedicating graves, and then I also wanted to share a couple experiences, or not experiences, a couple things that Ezra Taft Benson said, where he basically said that he's seen the Savior, right? In kind of explicit terms. So we'll do it in that order. So first, let's start with this story. Now, this is only found now on the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine. If you don't know what that is, look at the top left of the screen right here where my mouse is. This is, well, you know that online library that I go to sometimes called archive.org, where I read out of Doctrines of Salvation. That same group is the one that do the Wayback Machine, and what it is, basically they have archived all these different. I don't know how to explain it. Like if you don't know how the internet works, to make a long story short, you can see websites back in time. So you pick a website, it'll show you a timeline, and you can go back to certain dates, and you can see what that website looked like back in 1998, 2003, whatever. So this is where this is coming from, because this is from Earthlink. The original link is for earthlink.net, and as far as I know, Earthlink isn't around anymore. Let's check on that. Earthlink. No, it says is an American internet service provider since January 1997. Okay, well, it's been a while since I've heard of Earthlink. Anyway, okay, an experience of Ezekiel Johnson, half-brother of Seth Garnsey Johnson Sr. And then I'm going to zoom in so I can read this a little bit better so you can follow along. I've been requested to relate an experience I had in 1908 or 1909 in San Juan County. All right, where's San Juan County? That's obviously in Utah. San Juan County, Utah. Okay, this is the county that is the county of the Four Corners in Utah. Okay, and the Four Corners is right here. This is near where they have Monument Valley. You know Monument Valley. Monument Valley. You see this right here. Most people are familiar with these rock formations, right? This is Monument Valley. So this is the area that we're talking about, where we have Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. Okay, San Juan County. I was making a home in Blanding, and the whole country there was covered with trees and sagebrush. Blanding is up here. Okay, and I've been through there, and it is pretty bland, I'm not going to lie. Monticello, that's where we have, there's a temple there, one of the small temples. So anyway, the area in question, this is where it's taken place, okay? That's where it's taken place, Blanding. I was working hard to clear the ground to plant a few acres of corn. We had 5 acres cleared and started to plant. My little boy, about 8 years old, was there to help me. I'd plow around the piece and he would plant the furrow with corn. Then I covered it and plowed. Then I'd cover it and plow again. When I was plowing that piece of ground, I discovered there were ancient houses there. That is, the remnants of them. As I was plowing, I noticed that my plow had turned out the skeleton of a small child. The skull and the backbone, most of the bones were decayed. The skull and the backbone, Most of the bones were decayed and gone. Part of the skeleton was there, so I stopped as my plow passed it a little. I turned and leaned back against the bar of my plow between the handles. As I looked at the little skeleton that I had plowed out and wondering, all of a sudden, to my surprise, I saw the little bones begin to move. And they began to change position and to take on a different color. And within a minute, there lay a beautiful little skeleton. It was a perfect skeleton. Then I saw the inner parts of the natural body coming in, the insides, etc. I saw flesh coming on the body when the inner parts of the body were complete. A beautiful head of hair adorned the top of the head, and about half a minute after the hair was on the head, it had a beautiful crystal decoration in the hair. It was combed beautifully and parted on the side. In about a half a minute after that, the child raises up on her feet. Her feet, okay. She looked at me, and I looked at her for a quarter of a minute, and we just looked at her smile. We looked at each other smiling. Then, in my ambition to touch her, I said, "Oh, you beautiful child." And I reached as if I would embrace her, and she disappeared. That was all I saw. And I stood there and wondered, and I thought for a few minutes. My boy was wondering why I was there, because he was down at the other end of the row and anxious to plant corn. Now, I couldn't tell that story to anyone because it was so mysterious to me. Well, plus, and probably no one would have believed you. Why should I have such a miraculous experience? I couldn't figure a human being in such a condition as to accidentally plow that little body out and see it come alive. The body of a child about 5 or 6 years old, I'd say. I couldn't tell that story to anyone until finally one day I met a dear friend of mine, the stake patriarch, Wayne R. Red of Blanding, Utah. He stopped me on the street and said, "Zeke, you've had an experience on this mesa that you won't tell. I want you to tell me." When I told him, I told him. Then he had me tell it to other friends, and since I've told it in 4 temples on the U.S. and many meeting houses and conferences. I wondered, and it worried me for years as to why I was allowed to see such a marvelous manifestation of God's power. One day I was walking along with my hoe on my shoulder, going to hoe my corn. Something said, "Stop under the shade of that tree for a few minutes and rest." This just came to me, and I thought I would. So I stopped there. It was given to me. It was the answer to my prayer. I had prayed incessantly for an answer as to why I was privileged to see that resurrection. I was told why. When the child was buried, it was either in time of war with the different tribes, or it was winter when the ground was frozen and they had no tools to dig deep graves. They just planted the little body as deep as they would under the circumstances. When it was done, the sorrowing mother knew that it was such a shallow grave that she called out to the little group that was present, quote, "Oh, that little shallow grave, the first beast that comes along will smell her body and will dig her up and scatter her to the 4 winds. Her bones will be scattered all over those flats." End quote. There just happened to be a man present who held the priesthood, a Nephite or a Jaredite. This man said, "Sister, calm your sorrows. Whenever that little body is disturbed or uncovered, the Lord will call her up and she will live." Since that time, I've taken great comfort, great cheer, and consolation and satisfaction with praise in my heart and soul until I haven't the words to express it, that it was I that uncovered that little body. Thank you for listening to me. I just cannot tell this without crying. Zeke Johnson, son of Joel Hills Johnson. This is a true story. I worked in the temple with Ezekiel Johnson's grandson, and he gave me a copy. This came from the original, Ted C. This Ezekiel Johnson was born the 16th of April, 1869, to Joel Hills Johnson and Margaret Threlkeld. He died in February 1857. Thus, he is a half brother to Seth Johnson Sr., through whom we descend. Okay. So, make of that what you will. I wouldn't be surprised if this actually happened. I wouldn't. And, the question has come to my mind, how exactly does the resurrection take place? What's the process? Here we have an example where there was a partial skeleton, right? A partial skeleton. So it seems like what was already there was used, it was perfected, it was restored, and then anything that was missing just came to be. Obviously, somewhere the pattern, the formula for our body, whatever you want to call it, the recipe maybe, it's somewhere. There's some archive somewhere where that's stored. Maybe it's just with Heavenly Father himself, or who knows. But it happened. Okay, the story makes sense. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, this got me thinking about resurrection and about death and burial and cremation. So I just wanted to explore this just a little bit further. Thank you, Christian Zybarth, for sharing this with us. So right now, in the church handbook, this is what it says in regards to burial and cremation. The family of the deceased person decides whether his or her body should be buried or cremated. They respect the desires of the individual. In some countries, the law requires cremation. In other cases, burial is not practical or affordable for the family. In all cases, the body should be treated with respect and reverence. Members should be reassured that the power of resurrection always applies. And there's a reference for Alma 11:42 through 45. Let's just see what that says really quick. Now there is a death which is called temporal death, and the death of Christ shall loose the bands of this temporal death, that all shall be raised from this temporal death. Okay. The spirit and the body shall be reunited again in its perfect form. Both limb and joint shall be restored to its proper frame, even as we now are at this time. And we shall be brought to stand before God, knowing even as we know now, and have a bright recollection of our guilt. Now, this restoration shall come to all, both old and young, bond and free, both male and female, both the wicked and the righteous. And even there shall not so much as a hair of their heads be lost, but everything shall be restored to its perfect frame, as it is now, or in the body, and shall be brought and be arraigned before the bar of Christ, the Son, and God, to be judged according to their works, whether they be good or whether they be evil. Now behold, I have spoken unto you concerning the death of the mortal body, and also concerning the resurrection of the mortal body. I say unto you that this mortal body is raised to an immortal body, that is from death, even from the first death unto life, and that they can die no more, their spirits uniting with their bodies, never to be divided, thus the whole becoming spiritual and immortal, that they can no more see corruption. So that's a really reassuring thing. And you have to, the fact that right here he talks about having a bright recollection, you have to wonder if maybe that's part of being resurrected. Because I'm going to have to do another video about this, but I've read, I swear I've read something. I don't know if it was from Ezra Taft Benson, but someone's saying that all of our memories are actually like encoded into us. They're like written in the bones. And that might sound kind of weird. I will say, from what I've learned about memory, neuroscientists, they still don't really understand where memory is stored. And they believe that it could be in other places other than just the brain. I'll have to look into that some other time. Maybe the next video, I don't know. So it's just that's an interesting little detail. Now, of course, it may just be, you get resurrected, and of course, after that, there's the judgment. Um, you also have to wonder because we know that there's different types of resurrected bodies. So if you lived a telestial law, you'll receive a telestial resurrected body and live a telestial glory. So what I don't know is, are you resurrected and then you face some kind of judgment? Because once you're resurrected, are you resurrected to whatever your judgment's going to be? Like, so it's like, oh, you lived a telestial life. You're resurrected to a telestial body, and then you receive the judgment, or do you receive the judgment and then your body changes? I don't know. I guess you probably get resurrected to whatever glory. It's already determined what you're going to be, and so you're resurrected to that kind of body. That's my best guess. You can put your thoughts in the comments below about that. Moving on, it says, where possible, the body of the deceased member who has been endowed should be dressed in ceremonial temple clothing when it is buried or cremated. Which I guess I didn't know that you would still do that if the person is going to be cremated. But yeah, you should try and do that. A funeral or memorial service provides an opportunity for families to gather and perpetuate family relations and values. Okay, so you can do either, right? It's up to you. In some cases, you don't really have the choice when it's a country that has laws that dictate that you have to be cremated, right? I'm going to read a few other things though. Let's see. Let's go to the dedicating of graves. Okay. This is what is this? This is under priesthood ordinances and blessings, general instructions, dedicating graves. So I guess I'll just read this whole thing. Performance of this ordinance requires authorization from a priesthood leader who holds the appropriate keys or who functions under the direction of a person who holds those keys. A person who dedicates a grave should hold the Melchizedek priesthood and be authorized by the priesthood officer who conducts the service. To dedicate a grave, he 1. Addresses Heavenly Father, 2. States that he is acting by the authority of the Melchizedek priesthood. Now look at 3 and 4. Number 3, dedicates and consecrates the burial plot as the resting place for the body of the deceased. And number 4, prays that the place will be hallowed and protected until the resurrection, where appropriate. So that's an interesting thing there, because this kind of falls in line with the story that we just read. That basically, it doesn't sound like that Nephite or Jaredite gave like a formal dedication of that burial site, but in a sense he kind of did. He gave that promise that the body would be protected, and then if it's disturbed at that point, she'll be resurrected. All right, so it's kind of similar to what we're seeing here. So I think that's kind of interesting. So anyway, we're gonna read what Joseph Smith said. I've been wanting to do a video about sacred places, which include temples, because it seems like there's certain places where the Lord has determined that there should be temples, and they're sacred places. It seems like we have evidence of that. And in the case of being buried, it's not so much that that place was probably already determined to be sacred, but it's just wherever your body is buried, it becomes kind of a sacred place, and a place for your remains to wait for the resurrection. So anyway, now I'm just going to skip down to the last paragraph. If a church member's body is cremated, the presiding officer may use his judgment in determining whether to dedicate the place where the ashes are kept. He takes into account the desires of the family, local customs, and local laws. If the place is dedicated, the priesthood holder may adapt the instructions for dedicating a grave. Okay, so there's that. I guess the takeaway from this is that dedicating a grave, it's almost like, I would say maybe the main focus is to kind of preserve and hallow that area, um, but to protect it until the resurrection. Okay. Now, I want to look at July 1972, New Era, and it says, "What about?" The title is "What about cremation?" Answer by brother Spencer J. Palmer. I wonder if he's related to Palmer, to Watcher Palmer. Probably not. I personally prefer the bodies of the departed dead be buried in the earth in graves rather than be cremated by fire, a practice among Hindus and Buddhists, or left in sacred quote unquote towers of silence so that the corruptible flesh can be stripped away. So that the corruptible flesh can be stripped clean by vultures, as advocated by Parsis of Zoroastrianism, or disposed of by other means. I prefer this because I'm a Western man, prejudiced in favor to my own traditions, but from the Latter-day Saint point of view, there is more to it than this. From ancient times, the Lord's people have preferred the practice of burial of the dead. In the scriptures, it is the unvarying ideal. This tradition most nearly symbolizes the gospel teachings of death, burial, and resurrection, the atonement of Christ, and of baptism by immersion, by Paul, as Paul suggests in Romans 6. The bodies of the dead are an essential part of the eternal soul. They are sacred tabernacles of the Spirit. And, it's interesting because, what is a body? A body is essentially made up of food, right? We eat food, the food becomes part of the body. And we've explored this idea many times on the channel, including recently. And where does food come from? It comes from the earth, right? And where does the earth come from? Well, according to modern astronomy and science, basically the earth is what they call, it's made up of quote unquote stardust, or in other words, the material that makes up our local star. But anyway, you think of the individual atoms, the molecules as well, made up of atoms, and you just think about, maybe there's something to it that's just so much more sacred or personal than what we think. Once we acquire the material for our bodies, then maybe some process takes place, or it's just like maybe it's a special thing. I don't know. I feel like there's probably more there that we won't know until later. Maybe not, but it's interesting. Because otherwise, it wouldn't really matter. It wouldn't really matter if you still had the same material that made up your body. It could be that once your spirit inhabits your body, that the material that makes your body then takes on a new meaning because it's been a part of your temple, essentially, right? So I don't know. Okay, so let's move on. They are sacred tabernacles of the Spirit. Out of respect for the dead, their grave sites should be chosen wisely and should be properly maintained. But I see no justification for Confucian theories of geomancy for thinking that certain surface configurations, topography, are essential considerations in choosing burial sites of the dead. Neither is any reason to think that the dead spend their time trying to punish. Okay, neither. Neither is there any reason to think that the dead spend their time trying to punish, regulate, or reward the living kin on the basis of how well they care for them after them at death and after. Graves are not religious shrines. The body is ideally put away in a likeness of its coming forth from the grave, but the life and personality of the dead is neither in nor hovering about the grave. The spirits of the dead go to a place called paradise, a world of spirits awaiting the day of resurrection. Well, the righteous obviously go to paradise, the wicked go to a place called spirit prison, right? I find meaning and satisfaction in Joseph Smith's idyllic view of death and the resurrection once expressed in a funeral address. Now, I swear, we've gone over this before, I think. I think that I went over this in a video. If not, I've come across this. This is you can find this in the Scripture Citation Index website. You go to library. Well, you can search for it, or just go to library and go to the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. You can find it there. But I remember reading this at some point. Quote, this is Joseph Smith. "The place where a man is buried is sacred to me. This subject is made mention of in the Book of Mormon and other scriptures. Even to the Native Americans of this land, the burying places of their fathers are more sacred than anything else. I believe those who have buried their friends here, I believe those who have buried their friends here, their condition is enviable. Look at Jacob and Joseph in Egypt, how they required their friends to bury them in the tomb of their fathers." Yeah, you remember that? Because they had all gone down to Egypt, but Joseph said that once he passed away, he wanted to be buried with his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I think they're all buried together. I can't remember. They are, aren't they? Yeah, okay. Anyway, so it was important to him. And there's obviously a spiritual lesson there as well. It's like, you don't want to die and you don't want to die in sin. You can look at it on that level, on that kind of symbolic level. When you die, you want to return to a place of holiness, and this is kind of like a pattern of that. So anyway, but there could be more to it than just that. So, see the expense which attended the embalming and the going up of the great company to the burial. It has always been considered a great calamity not to obtain an honorable burial, and one of the greatest curses the ancient prophets could put on any man was that he should go without a burial. I have said, Father, I desire to die here among the saints, but if this is not thy will, and I go hence and die, wilt thou find some kind friend to bring my body back, and gather my friends who have fallen in foreign lands, and bring them up hither, that we may all lie together. I will tell you what I want. If tomorrow I shall be called to lie in yonder tomb, in the morning of the resurrection, let me strike hands with my Father, and cry, my Father, and he will say, my son, as soon as the rock rends, and before we come out of our graves. And may we contemplate these things so. Yes, if we learn how to live and how to die, when we lie down, we contemplate how we may rise in the morning. Would you think it strange if I relate what I have seen in vision in relation to this interesting theme? So plain was the vision that I actually saw men, before they had ascended from the tomb, as though they were getting up slowly. They took each other by the hand and said to each other, my father, my son, my mother, my daughter, my brother, my sister. And when the voice calls for the dead to arise, I suppose I am laid by the side of my father. What would be the first joy of my heart? To meet my father, my mother, my brother, my sister. And when they are by my side, I embrace them and they me. So, he's suggesting that where you are buried is where you'll be resurrected, right? And I don't know if this has to do, again, if it has to do with your remains, whatever remains survive, because obviously there's people that die and their bodies completely are just no more. Think of people that like died at sea and stuff like that. So I wonder, because I highly doubt that when you're resurrected, if you died at sea, that you're gonna find yourself at the bottom of the ocean. Um, I mean, I don't know. Of course, the Earth itself is going to change at the second coming, and there's weird stuff going on with the ocean. It seems that it's mostly going to go to the north, so I don't know. I don't know, but it seems like at the very least, the general rule is that you'll be resurrected wherever you're buried. You have to think about the two missionaries that served their missions in the Turkey mission back in the 1800s. The ones that they died from disease, and then they were buried in Palestine or the land of Israel. The ones whose graves were instrumental in being able to create the BYU Jerusalem Center. You know, if that's the case, then it sounds like maybe they'll be resurrected there, which is far away from home. But um, obviously, there's the idea some people think that once you're resurrected or translated, you'll be able to move at the speed of thought, which I haven't been able to really substantiate that idea. I know that there's been certain circumstances where someone was transfigured and they seem to move from one place to another without any effort, but I'm not sure if that's an inherent characteristic of being translated or resurrected, or if that's just what happened in that story to facilitate the experience that was occurring. So I don't know. Okay, moving on. This is the ideal, the perfect pattern of death and resurrection. But unfortunately, this procedure of death and burial is not always possible for man, nor perhaps is it always desirable. Too many people die violent and horrible deaths. Pilots are shot down, and their bodies sometimes waste away in prison camps. Human bodies are often mutilated, torn, destroyed, and sometimes entirely obliterated by war or accidents of fire and automobile. Some men are buried at sea. Oh, yeah, see? And their bodies devoured by marine creatures. Not all bodies, not even all bodies of the righteous and the faithful, can be buried whole or buried in the earth at all. In parts of Europe and in the southern United States, the underground water is so high that bodies cannot be buried in the earth. Hence, they are frequently placed in containers above the earth and sometimes placed on top of one another. In today's world, there are local laws in some countries that prohibit burial and encourage cremation. Some metropolitan areas in Asia are so crowded that grave sites are a precious commodity and are outrageously expensive. Funerals and burials are prohibitive in cost to some of the most faithful members of the church in that part of the world. Hence, although I personally prefer embalming and burial, and although it has been the pattern followed by Israel, there appears to be no prohibition against cremation in the scriptures or in the theology of the church. Certainly, there is no doubt but that people whose bodies are destroyed by fire, cremated, as was the case with one of our Korean sisters in a recent hotel disaster, will rise again intact in the resurrection from the dead. The fundamental elements of the body of mankind are never lost or allowed to belong to another soul. Now, that's an interesting idea. The fundamental elements of the body of mankind are never lost or allowed to belong to another soul. So, our bodies are constantly changing. We're always getting rid of waste. I want to say I've heard something about this that, like, by a certain age, you no longer have the same body that you had, you know, so many years before. I could be wrong about that. So I don't know if it's just like by the time that you die, those are the elements that you get back, or if it's like throughout your whole life, or it's probably getting a little bit too technical, but that's an interesting statement. He says, see documentary history of the church, volume 5, page 339. These will be restored whole, as Alma promised. I'm going to skip over that because we already read it. All of us need to realize that there are Latter-day Saints around the world who prefer cremation to burial. Here, for example, is the view of a young Japanese Latter-day Saint, a returned missionary who is now at BYU, a top student and respected church member. Quote, in Japan, we often cremate the remains of our dead, and I definitely feel that this practice is cleaner than burying somebody's dead body under the ground. After cremation, only dust and some small bones remain. But just imagine the decay of dead bodies that people put under the ground for the worms and bacteria to eventually take care of. That seems very unclean to me. It is probably a matter of how I was raised, but after the spirit is gone, the body is lifeless material. This material will come back in the resurrection no matter whether you cremate it or bury it underground. So far as church doctrines are concerned, I don't see anything wrong with cremation. I would rather see cleanliness. I would rather see cleanliness for the living than sentimental feeling for the dead. End quote. Also, I feel there are unusual circumstances when cremation is preferable and in accordance with the mind and will of the Lord. The experience of my mission president some 20 years ago in connection with the death of Mark Johnson Vest, a Native American member of the Cocowapas tribe, is a vivid and memorable example in point. Brother Vest was branch president over an active group of Latter-day Saints at the time of his death. En route to Brother Vest's funeral in Arizona, the mission president prayed earnestly that the Lord would tell him why Brother Vest had been taken. As he prayed, he visualized Mark Johnson Vest standing in front of a large group of Native Americans, which he estimated to be about 10,000. Mark was preaching the gospel to them. As he did so, one of the Native Americans in the middle of the group stood up and said, "Do not listen to this man. He is not a Lamanite. He is a Nephite." After this, Mark Johnson Vest rose to his full stature and said, "I am not a Nephite. I am a Lamanite, and when I died, I was cremated according to the custom of my people." When the mission president arrived at the town where the funeral was to be held, the stake president told him of a serious problem that had developed. Mark's tribe, the Cocowapas, wanted him cremated according to their ancient customs. His wife's tribe wanted him, quote-unquote, properly buried. The Cocowapas had said that if he were buried, they would dig him up so they could cremate him. In his funeral talk, the mission president related the vision he had during the night. This settled the problem of cremation to the satisfaction of both tribes, and there was no more fighting among them over the matter. After the funeral service, the mission president and his wife witnessed the cremation of Mark Johnson Vest. So, here's a situation where actually it would be better, I guess, for the spiritual welfare of these 10,000 Lamanites that he be cremated. So it really is just it's a personal thing, but probably the rule of thumb, the most ideal is to be buried, but ultimately you're going to be resurrected either way, right? And it's not going to interfere with your resurrection. I did want to read this as well. Now, this is August 1991 Ensign. Cremation is custom in various parts of the world. Do Latter-day Saints practice it? This is Roger R. Kelly, Associate Professor of Church History and Doctrine at BYU. It is true that many peoples practice cremation as a way of dealing with the bodies of their dead. It is an ancient practice. A common philosophy in some cultures where the dead are cremated is that there is a basic opposition between the spirit and the flesh. The body is often viewed as something from which to escape. The body, it is thought, imprisons an immortal spirit which needs to rise above the material world to realize its true destiny, or the body may be viewed as part of an illusory world. In either case, the body is sometimes considered of little significance. In some cultures, it is believed that the spirit is not released until the corpse is burned completely to ashes. In this case, fire is viewed as a purifying and liberating agent. The earliest regular cremations in the Middle East seem to have been among the Hittites from 1740 to 1190 BC, and the Philistines, 1200 BC. Even so, cremation was unparalleled in both civilizations by the practice of burial. However, in Hindu and Greek thought, cremation pointed to the impurity of the body. Fire was seen as the vehicle of regeneration or rebirth. In Asia, the custom received wider acceptance after the Buddha was cremated. Since he set the example, many Buddhist countries such as Indochina, Korea, and Japan practice cremation. Interestingly, cremation was not popular in China, probably because of the strong Confucian influence, which emphasized respect for one's ancestors. In Japan, the first recorded cremation was that of the monk Dosho in 700 AD, an example which was followed by the Empress Jito in 704 AD, which gave imperial sanction to the practice. Even so, cremation declined in medieval Japan. In the West, cremation was common among the Greeks and the Romans. It was the mode by which the bodies of the Caesars were destroyed. Among the Jews, cremation was generally not practiced. The Mishnah forbids cremation as an act of idolatry. By the way, the Mishnah, it's what the Jews believe to be the oral Torah. They believe that at Mount Sinai, Moses received the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, but like a written Torah, but also an oral Torah. And it remained oral over time, but I can't remember exactly when it was. I don't know if it was like, I think it was after the Babylonian captivity. There came a point where they realized that it would be in danger. They had to like write it down because of all these different things that kept happening to the Jewish nation, and so they didn't want it to be lost. So it's now called the Mishnah, and the Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah. So that's what that's referring to. In those rare instances where cremation did take place, it was a sign of unrighteousness. See Amos 6:10. Let's look at that. And a man's uncle shall take him up, and he that burneth him, to bring out the bones out of the house, and shall say unto him that is by the sides of the house, is there yet any with thee? And he shall say, no. Then shall he say, hold thy tongue, for we may not make mention of the name of the Lord. Okay. Or of punishment due a criminal. And then there's Leviticus 20, 21, Joshua 7. Christianity likewise opposed cremation. This reluctance to cremate can basically be traced to the Jewish and Christian belief that when God created the body and all other things, he pronounced them very good. The body was God's creation, and according to Christians, it would rise with the Spirit in the resurrection. Thus, to cremate it would be an act of disrespect for God. A change occurred, however, in the latter part of the 19th century. The unsanitary conditions of many cemeteries in Western Europe caused people to reassess the way they treated their dead. Movements recommending cremation began around 1860 and 1884. A judicial decision legalized cremation in Britain. France legalized it in 1889, and today it is legal in more than 3/4 of the world's nations. The reasons are widely known. Cremation is hygienic, requires little land, it is appropriate to rapidly growing urban areas. Today, 10% of the dead are cremated in the United States, 20% in Canada, and 60% in Britain. Where do Latter-day Saints fit into this picture? We reaffirm the perspective that the body is good, and as a creation of God, it is to be respected. But as the church has moved into nations other than the United States, there has been recognition that cultural practices differ. Generally, Latter-day Saints in the Western world have felt that nothing should be done which is destructive to the body. That should be left to nature. Church leaders have counseled that only in unusual circumstances or where required by law should cremation take place. There's a footnote. Footnote 11, that takes you to the General Handbook of Instructions, but it seems that has changed because it no longer, we just read it. It doesn't say that anymore. That was March 1989, 1 through 5. Ultimately, after consultation with the Lord and with priesthood leaders, the family must decide what to do. If the person has been endowed, some special instructions are available for the family from local priesthood leaders. Even if a body is cremated, a funeral service may be held if the ashes are buried or deposited in a mausoleum. Where there's no overriding reason to cremate, burial is still the preferred method of handling our dead. In the end, however, we should remember that the resurrection will take place by the power of God who created the heavens and the earth. Ultimately, whether a person's body was buried at sea, destroyed in combat, or an accident, intentionally cremated, or buried in a grave, the person will be resurrected. No clearer picture of God's restorative powers can be found than Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, in which he sees the bones gathered together and clothed with sinews and flesh by the power of God. Nothing that is done to the body will, in the end, prevent the purpose of our Lord from being fulfilled. Our bodies and our spirits will finally be reunited in the resurrection of the dead. Okay? So just as a reminder, after reading all that, remember that the church handbook currently says it's up to you whether you should. Either way, the body should be respected. So, yeah. Okay, now, I had come across this LDS Living article. So if you want to read, I'm going to read two instances where Ezra Taft Benson basically said that he saw the Savior. Okay, and I pulled up the actual sources. If you want to see the other ones, there are some more in this article, then go to ldsliving.com and check it out. So the first one, it's April 1991. This is in the Ensign. Okay, and it says here, because he was God, even the Son of God, he alone had the power of resurrection. And so on the third day following his burial, he came forth from the tomb alive and showed himself to many. There were witnesses then who saw him. There have been many in this dispensation who have seen him. As one of those special witnesses, so called in this day, I testify to you that he lives. He lives with a resurrected body. There is no truth or fact of which I am more assured or more confident than the truth of the literal resurrection of our Lord. Okay? So he basically just said that there without saying it. He says, there have been many in this dispensation who have seen him. As one of those, so he just put himself in that category. There are many who have seen him in this dispensation. As one of those, I testify to you that he lives. He just said he's seen Christ. And then down here he says, because Christ is God, even the Son of God, he will come again as he prophesied. Referring to the second coming. Now that makes a lot of sense. Because when we're thinking about Christ and the resurrection, a lot of times we think about the story back when he came out of the tomb, right? We think about that, but really, his resurrection, I think, is very, very tied to the second coming, because this is going to be his second coming. His first coming was in the flesh, right? In mortality. But when he comes in the second coming, the difference is that he's going to be resurrected. And then on top of that, he's going to be the king of the world. And he's literally going to be in our presence, right? We're actually, with our eyes, going to see him. So when you think about that, you have to think about, let's see, LDS church symbol. You have to think about this symbol change that was introduced in 2020, right? The new church symbol. And the symbol, the official explanation for it, as delivered by President Nelson in General Conference, April 2020, is that this symbolizes the resurrected Christ coming out of the tomb. Okay, this archway is supposed to remind us of him emerging from the tomb. So in my mind, this is actually a very second coming symbol, because I think it's meant to impress on our minds that he really is alive and we are about to see him soon. I've done videos about the symbol. Okay, there's more to it than just that, because what is thought to be his tomb is not actually a Roman arch like this. It's more of just like a typical doorway, like rectangular. This shape right here, perfectly fits into the front doors of the Salt Lake Temple. Okay, and I've done it on Photoshop. In fact, I might as well pull this up and then I'll put it in the description. You might want to check it out if you haven't. Let's see. Do symbol. Yeah, I've done a number of videos. Not only does it fit into the Salt Lake Temple, the two front doors, but it also fits into the eastern retaining wall of the Temple Mount, called the Golden Gate, sometimes called the Shushan Gate, which historically it's said to be, it's believed that that's the gate that Messiah will come through. I think, if I remember right, both Jews believe that when Messiah comes, that he'll go through that gate, but also Christians, that during the second coming, he will go through that gate. So, and that's also basically the symbolism or the idea of the Salt Lake Temple with its two front doors, because you don't go through those two front doors. They're locked. And so the idea is that Christ, when he comes, it would be reserved for him. He would go through those doors. So in a way, it's almost like this symbol is suggesting like he's here. He's coming through the door, right? Okay, so going back here, this is 5 marks of divinity, and this is in the December 1980 New Era. Okay, and let's just go really quick through the 5 marks. So the first mark of his divinity is his divine birth. Okay. The second mark of his the second mark of the divinity of Christ is his ministry. A third mark of his divinity is his great atoning sacrifice. A fourth mark of his divinity is his literal resurrection. And this is the section that we're looking at. At the end of it, he says, in this dispensation, commencing with the prophet Joseph Smith, the witnesses are legion. So, referring to many people who have seen the resurrected Christ since Joseph Smith. The witnesses are legion. They're many. As one of those, see, he again, just like he did the other time, as one of those, part of the legion, as one of those called as a special witness, I add my testimony to those of fellow apostles. He lives. He lives with resurrected body. There is no truth or fact of which I am more assured, or know better by personal experience than the truth of the literal resurrection of our Lord. So, yeah, these are two pretty on the nose declarations by President Benson. Again, if you want to read some of the other ones, this article by LDS Living has a few others, but I think that these are probably the two best ones. Interestingly, in this, after he says that, he goes into the fifth point. It says, "Last, I name as the mark of his divinity, his promised coming." So talking about the second coming. It's very connected, both the resurrection of Christ as well as the resurrection in general, because the majority of people are going to be resurrected during the second coming. It's the morning of the first resurrection. Although we do know that there have been other people that have been resurrected already, including, it would seem, this girl in the story that we just read, this 5 or 6 year old girl. Now, oh, excuse me. Oh goodness. I kind of wanted to read this, but it's probably going to have to be for another video where he goes over, what's going to happen with the second coming, the order of things. So, but I'll save that for another video. We're already at like about an hour. I hope you enjoyed this. I know that I did. As far as this story goes, again, I'm not pushing this as truth. You'll have to just make up your own mind about it. It would be really interesting, though, if it is true, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's true. I feel like I've heard another story similar to this, although I don't know if it was just like a retelling of this story or if it was some other story. So if you know of another version of this, or like a separate instance where somebody witnessed somebody else being resurrected, feel free to send that my way, and I'll do a video about it. So, but what a really special experience that must have been to see that. That would have been pretty incredible. All right, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions, information down in the comments below, or feel free to email me. The email's in the description of every video. Also, make sure to share this, and I'll talk to you guys later.